Please listen carefully.
Hi, welcome to Listen Up, a podcast all about employee voice, the listening organisation, and all of the stuff associated with organisational culture, people, leadership, the things that we here at Hark and care about. Now, today I am super excited to be joined by someone who's become a friend over recent years. I first came across Dr. Richard Claydon on LinkedIn, believe it or not. I lost a morning to a bunch of articles that took me down some rabbit holes, but somebody that clearly understands a great deal about organizational culture, leadership. And I'm going to ask Richard to introduce himself in a moment, just talk a little bit about his own work. But before I do that, I just wanted to share something. We've all done that Google experiment where you Google yourself and see what it says about you. Well, I asked ChatGPT what it knows of, what do you know of Dr. Richard Claydon? And I was really struck by this. So Dr. Richard Claydon is recognized for his work in organizational behavior and complexity science, particularly focusing on leadership, culture, and employee engagement. He often discusses how traditional management theories are insufficient for modern complex organizational environments and advocates for approaches that address the ambiguity and paradoxes inherent in today's workplaces. Dr. Claydon's insights are frequently applied in discussions about how to foster environments of trust, adaptability, and resilience within organizations, aligning closely with themes of psychological safety and engagement. So straight off the bat, you can probably understand why Richard's work appeals to me. But I was really taken by that. And I don't know what your thoughts hearing that, because that's how accurate would you say that would be of your own position?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, I would describe myself as an organisational theorist rather than a complexity scientist or organisational behaviourist. But I think that the fact that it's used those two things, I mean, organisational theory draws from multiple disciplines in order to do the work. So the fact that it's picked a couple of disciplines, I think, and then it's also brought in leadership studies and maybe employee engagement, which comes out of psychology. It's kind of, that's kind of accurate. I draw from multiple dimensions to try and help leaders create conditions that are more suitable for effective work in complex conditions and complex environments. So it's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Good. That's not bad, is it? I'm sort of struck out. Again, you know yourself, and I would like you to sort of tell us a little bit about your background and stuff. But I read that and thought, you know what? That's, what I know of you, and the interactions we've had over the years. I was thinking, certainly we are talking about the right person, and it's the right sort of work and the things I hear you talk about. So I was really impressed. I haven't done it on myself yet. I daren't. I'd get something about botany probably. I've got some work to do on the Google.
There's a challenge with your name. Yes.
Anyway, there we go. So that's all my intro. Tell me a bit about yourself.
Well, at the moment I live in Singapore. I've lived in multiple places: Denmark, Hong Kong, Sydney, Lisbon, Bangkok, Milan, plus numerous places in the UK. So I've moved around a lot for various different reasons. I suppose nowadays I'm most focused on developing higher level leaders. So most of my work now has moved away from the behavioural stuff in the midst of the organisation, and then looking at how do you actually create leaders who can do the work, who can create the conditions in which effective work is done. Because I think that discussions with clients, they're very aware that the vast majority of the people leading projects and teams and teams of teams in their organisation have been let down by poor development work. Lots of people have had none. I work with lots of clients where they haven't had any development in the management and leadership space for 20 years. And then they're working in very complex environments, and they're kind of making things up as they go along. And sometimes they're making really interesting things up as they go along, but sometimes they're sinking rather than swimming. And what you try and do is give them a framework to hang their experiences on and say, I was doing this, and actually that talks to to this piece of research, and that it gives them confidence to keep on going.
Yeah.
Or if they're going in the wrong direction, you kind of pull them back and say, well, maybe you should think about this and that and the other. And so I work with a bunch of people in that space to try and do that work. And it was, I guess, semi-accidental. I didn't expect. I would have very happily stayed in the behaviour space, but people kept asking me to do leadership stuff.
Yeah.
And the first time I did leadership stuff, I didn't really know what I was talking about. I was kind of asked to go and run a leadership program at an MBA level, and I was like, I actually said in the interview, yeah, but I only do organisational behaviour and organisational theory, of which, and I don't know much about leadership. And they went, oh, you'll be fine. And that was kind of the introduction to me into leadership. And then it was fascinating because it was an MBA focused on emerging economies. And so my introduction to leadership theory was, this is all written by largely dead white North Americans. And I don't see how any of it applies to what's going on in these emerging economies. And I've been asked to teach it. What am I going to do? And so my dissatisfaction with leadership theory emerged from that.
Yeah.
And then I've moved further and further into higher levels of leadership, so global MBAs and executive MBAs and executive training as I've gone forward, because really that layer of complexity is what I'm interested in.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Just before we go forward, let's go back a little bit. So talk to me more about the behavioural work that you were doing originally. So what led you into the space you were in?
So I did a master's in cross-cultural communication in Newcastle in the UK, another place I've lived, right. And then I graduated top of the class, which allowed me to receive an award to do a PhD. So I got paid to do a PhD, which was in Sydney, which is why I moved to Sydney. And so it was a fully funded PhD program where I was getting a salary to do it. Not much of a salary. Universities don't have much money, but enough salary that I didn't have to have a second job on the side to live. And I focused on, I guess, the ironic stance in organizations. And this will move us into the listening aspect of your work. And this is that. So the ironic stance is somebody that has seen an absurdity or a flaw in the organization. So they go, this is not right. This is absurd. This is not. We think we're doing this, but actually it's causing that, and it's a problem. But I seem to be the only person who sees it. What do I do? Yeah. And so then you've got a listening challenge. Because if you raise it to a senior executive and it was their plan and their method, and they don't see what you're seeing, and you raise it directly to them, well, the chances are you get squashed, you get your head cut off, you get thrown out of the organization. It's a career limiting discussion to have. So what do you actually do? Well, you've got two things you can do. You either try and find other people in the organization who can see the same absurdity, or you present it in a covert way to try and trick the leader into thinking that they discovered it. And so there's a covert, both ways are quite covert, because you want to see, you don't want to say, oh, here's an absurdity, have you seen it? You want to see if other people are seeing what you're seeing by prodding and probing and seeing if you could guide them into a discussion about it. Yeah. But with the leader who has the power over you, you are going. You're much more. It has to be very covert. I have to make them think that they've worked it out for themselves, not that it's come from me, in order to not get my head chopped off. And the challenge of doing it badly. So even if you're really covert and you're really elegant, there's still the risk that they think you're taking the piss. Yeah. They think you're being sarcastic and you're saying you're an idiot for doing this, and you still get your head chopped off. But what we discovered was a huge number of people were operating like that in the organizations we were researching. And also within the leadership literature, but this is my link to the leadership literature, there's a developmental model of leadership skills, which says the ironic stance is the highest stance a leader can take. So the leader moves into every organization looking for absurdities and then taking joy that they can find the absurdities, because that's something that they can act upon.
Yeah.
And so, right at the highest level of leadership is this kind of model. that we found in the body of the organisation, but not so much at the top.
Yeah.
And then, but leadership theory says, no, it's right at the top of the organisation as well. So that's kind of the behavioural background. And then around that, you've got things like engagement and commitment and resistance. And so I moved into the engagement space because we're really looking at zeal for one way of doing things, cynicism towards one way of doing things, and this messy middle where the irony emerges. But also in the messy middle, you get ambivalence emerging, you get anxiety emerging, you get confusion emerging, you get exhaustion because people, I don't know what to do. You know, these people are saying this is rubbish, and these people are saying this is amazing, and I'm stuck in the middle. So you've got all of that going on, which so that's what got me into complexity and that space. Because we nearly all of leadership research and organisational research is at the ends. These people are super committed, high performers, do this with them. These people are super resistant, low performers, do that with them. Well, most of us are in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
And nobody's talking about these people.
Yeah.
So what do you do with those people? And also the fact that the ironic people in this group are hidden high performers. Perhaps the highest performers who are hidden from the organisational gaze. So that's kind of where the behavioural stuff started and pushed me into leadership eventually.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, as I said to you before we started this, I don't typically operate with a massive structure, but you've just said a whole bunch of stuff. I think I could go in all sorts of directions. There's a lot of interesting things in there, but let me try and put some order to this, because there are some things I want to talk to you about, just to pick apart just some of the things you talked about and explore in more detail with them. But let's just start somewhere, which is, of course, we talk about the listening organisation. This is the one bit of preparation you had from me. The idea that that's what we talk about, the listening organisation. But what does that expression mean to you? The listening organisation.
So I am going to slightly reverse the question because I actually think organisations talk a lot, and there's not so much listening going on. The listening is supposed to be one directional only. So you get a lot of talking at the top, and that filters down through the organisation, and other people are supposed to listen to that talk. Now, talk is the wrong word. It's communication. It can be written communication as well as verbal communication. Yep. But it's this one-way expectation that those in the body of the organisation listen to those at the top of the organisation. And there's some really interesting research about that. So the two things I want to draw attention to. So let's go into the absurdities. The two things to draw attention to. Absurdity number one. So if most senior leadership now is about changing things because we're in this transformational shift, but people aren't listening to the change stuff, and they're not, because what it looks like is something like 1.3% of all of the communication they get is around this change. And it's not actually the work they're doing on a day-to-day basis, so they're not listening to how and why the organisation needs to change, even though it's being spoken.
Yes.
And it might not be spoken very well. So there's another piece of research on leadership clarity. And the leaders, what they ask leaders is, well, how good are you at making a complex problem digestible and accessible and clear? And 98% of leaders say, I'm great at that. And then they bring them into a room and they experiment and they say, right, what you're going to do is you've got a minute to explain your complex challenge to other people of a pretty similar level to you, who should be able to think at the same level as you. And they do it. And only 5% of the audience can repeat back, or it's only 5% of the time of these leaders that the audience can say, yes, they were saying this, they were saying that. So you've got two things that might be going on here. One is the leaders are terrible at being clear, which is, I think, more than half of it. But the other one is, well, actually, are any of these other senior leaders in the room actually listening to what's being said? Or are they hearing one thing and then things go on off in their own head about, oh, this and that and the other one? Oh, I want to appear clever when I respond to this, when the facilitator says, oh, what do you think? And they stop listening. Now, I don't think we know. I don't think the research tells us whether it's a lack of clarity in the presentation or a lack of effort in the listening. But I think it's kind of both. It would be lovely to know exactly which way it falls. But the other issue is, well, anyone at the top, are they listening to what's going on in the body of the organisation? So, and I think they're not very much. I mean, I know from talking to clients where we have technology similar to yours, where we say, well, wouldn't it be great to hear what everyone is saying? And pretty much the standard response is, well, no, not really, because they might be saying things that we don't want to hear.
Right.
Which goes straight back to the irony again, is, well, actually, there are conversations going on that are going to reveal really, really important things for your organisation to know. And having just chatted with a few other people in leadership development recently, there was met up with a few in Singapore, and they said the same thing. They said, look, when I develop senior leaders about strategy and things, they don't seem to be hearing what the customer wants.
No.
But every time I work with a more junior team, there's always nuggets of gold about what the customer actually wants. But that's you never hear that in the meetings with the senior team. No. So there's a two-way listening challenge. And I'm not sure how to solve either of them. That's your job, fortunately. But alongside that, there is this challenge of saying things that leaders don't want to hear, but you feel you have to say them, and which is the irony space.
Yeah. Well, let's just dive into that a bit further, because, or what would you say is behind that leadership reluctance? I mean, this is the big issue. We talk about two things, right? Two big challenges for a company like Harken. Activating voices of employees, and there's a load of stuff wrapped up in that. Safety, what's the bloody point? All that sort of stuff that we can get into. But how do we activate voices of employees, make it safe for them to share constructive feedback and sense make collectively, etc.? And then activating or strengthening the listening muscles in leadership, right? And in that part, there is resistance, a really interesting resistance, which centers around this idea: what if I hear stuff I don't like? What would you say was behind that?
Oh, anxiety, really. I mean, a huge percentage of leaders that I meet are anxious, and a lot of what you're doing is to kind of calm the anxiety. They're very anxious that. And understandably so, with all the downsizing and resizing that's going on at the moment, they're very anxious that if there's anything that illustrates they can't do their job, that there's going to be a problem for them. So if they actually aren't listening to any indications they're not doing their job, and what they're doing and tends to do is reframe it as a problem in the people below me. Oh, look, I've gone to one of the big consultancies. They've delivered me a bunch of best practices. I've implemented a program related to these best practices, and I've delegated it downwards to myself, managing teams, and they're not doing it. So it's not my fault. I've done everything I have to do, and they're not doing it. Now, is this a sort of plausible deniability? Or is this a genuine belief in this is the right thing to do? Now, I tend to go towards the latter. I actually think many leaders have been trained that this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, we've got these very complex environments, and in order to reduce the complexity, we have to go to subject matter experts. We bring in the subject matter experts. They reduce the complexity. They give us a plan. We put the plan in place. Everybody does the work. All good. I think they're acting on best intentions. Now, as soon as you go into complexity science, you know how much of that is nonsense. Is you actually need people wrestling with the situation to do all the sense making, not following external plans. But I still think it's based on best intentions and traditional leadership development. And I think the vast majority of MBAs I'm aware of still develop managers and leaders that way. Here's your body of expertise. So with an MBA, it would be quite generalist expertise, but they basically go marketing, finance, IT. It's generalist expertise across the system. And then you go to the consultancy for your specialist expertise. You reduce complexity, boom, done. I think there is probably some plausible deniability going on. Where people are protecting their positions and politics is going on. But I prefer to always think of the majority of humans having best intentions and doing the thing that they think is right. But being unaware of what they're actually causing. So here the irony comes in as well. So if you are delegating, directing teams doing complex work and not allowing them to wrestle with it themselves, well, that predicts low productivity, low quality, loss of pride and purpose, and antagonistic relations. And I don't think you have to be particularly imaginative to look into an organization and say, well, I see all four of those things. It's not difficult to find evidence of low productivity. It's not difficult to find evidence of low quality. It's certainly the fact that there seems to be no purpose and pride in the work is pretty much everywhere. And antagonistic relations, which is now called toxicity, that's you hear about it all the time. So I think it's a mismatch between what's being done at the senior levels to what's being done in the body of the organisation. And to talk about listening, I actually think the people in the body of the organisation are trying hard to listen to the practices that are imposed upon them very often, and they're following the steps, etc. But those steps are failing because they always will in complex environments. And the manager doesn't think he needs to listen downwards because he says, well, if it's failing, it's because I've got the wrong people. I just need to get better people. And again, that is a discourse you hear all the time. Oh, we just need to get the next better talent. It's everywhere. Rather than listen to what our current talent has to say about the situation they're wrestling with and then go in and facilitate possible solutions. I don't think many senior leaders are skilled in that facilitation work. And I think that's because as soon as you're doing facilitation work, guess what? You have to listen. Because facilitation requires people to talk and converse and listen to each other. And not only do you have to listen, you have to allow other people to listen to each other. And I just don't see. And I'm going to make a proviso. I have and still do work with a number of senior leaders who are amazing at this. They are incredible at creating environments in which deep conversations happen and everybody listens. But I want to say that they are the exception that proves the rule. There's not many of them that I'm aware of, but there are enough where I go, well, clearly they're amazing, and that's what good leadership should look like in the future. So listening needs to be embedded in the whole process, both ways, in order for us to start shifting organisations in directions they need to go.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant response to the question about it. I think we see the same things, by the way. That sort of sense of it isn't even organisations. It's leaders within organisations. So you see pockets of behaviour where, of course, Harkin's approach to this stuff is anonymised dialogue, because that's where we try to level voice and bring everybody to the table equally as far as you can. But that's really all about the sense making piece, right? Can we understand what's happening on the ground of our company, so that we, people, and the thing you were describing earlier on, the ironic bit, or it's the what's the word? Constructive deviance I picked up when it's that sort of idea that I'm sensing out whether I'm the only one, so I can say provocative things in a safe way. But it's fascinating how we see, even in the same organisation, wildly different approaches and attitudes to this sort of insight and information being made available, right? So the sense-making process is deeply threatening to some people, and others want to just go and explore further. Tell me more about that. It's very interesting. I think there's a lot of work to do. Let's just move forward a little bit further. So you touched on a bunch of other things that I would love to hear you share some more of. So complexity. And so the sort of way I was thinking about this before we started this morning was sort of perspectives on a sort of changing workplace. We hear, we write about this all the time, rapidly changing world. The world of work is changing faster. It's wildly different than it was even a few years ago. It's unrecognizable from when I started work. But what are your, how much sway with that sort of discourse?
So I think, and again, I'll just go through the leadership development frame, and I think that leadership development has been focused on this for 70 years and has failed desperately. And I think the reason they failed is there's a duality in leadership that is, and most people now say leaders are this and managers are that. That's the duality. But the classic duality is you either have leaders who have a care for production, or you have leaders who have a care for people. And historically, everything was about production. Okay, big industrial organizations, heavy machines. How do we get the production working? And over time, as we've become a more digitalized economy, it's been becoming, the idea is, well, it's been more about people, because you can only deliver the work through the people. You can't do it yourself anymore because the work's become too complex. So you have to build trusting relations and networks with other people who can do the work. Now, I think that's the wrong duality. And so when you bring complexity science in the piece, the duality is stable, it's order and change. So if you look at one of the models that I bounce off, which is the Cynefin framework, so it has two types of order. It has clear order and it has complicated order. So clear order is something that you just can tell somebody to do and they can do it without thinking because it's so obvious. And complicated order is the more linear work where you've got a whole bunch of experts who understand their bit and do that work. But then you shift into the other side of the diagram, and it's change. And there's two types of change. There's complex change and there's chaotic change. Now, both words are scary for most leaders. Complex is a scary word. Chaotic is an even scarier word.
Yeah.
And what we're actually having to do is to get leaders into the complex space in order to avoid ending up in the chaotic space. So they have to become better at complex change. They have to be able to inject some change into the order to stop everything becoming too static and stable and etc. In order to stop themselves falling into chaos. So that's so instead of people and production, we now should be focused on order and change. And how do you do both? And as soon as you move into the expectation and understanding, my role as a senior leader is to change things. Here's the stability. How do I progress? How do I change things to make them better, to make them cheaper, to make them more effective? And I can't do all of this myself. I have to work with other people. I have to socialize it across all the ideas across the organization. You're then into a deep listening space. Now, what I see is a doubling down of doing the things that don't work, but doing them faster instead of changing the things that don't work and doing them differently.
Yep.
And there's two. I'm going to tell a quick story of my experience with that. And this was many years ago, before I knew all of this stuff, but I could still facilitate. And I was invited to partake in Tennis Australia's Future of Tennis event, where they got they got representatives from the top performing tennis clubs and tennis centres in Australia to come together and say, look, we have a major problem. We're losing people from the sport. And that means we don't have enough money. And because we don't have enough money, the facilities are decaying and the infrastructure is falling apart, and we're in this downward spiral. And they presented really quite well an overview of what was going on. And the overview was lots of coaching, lots of competition, lots of information. Okay, so enough information so anybody who goes into our website can work out what's going on. Anyone can find a coaching program really easily. Anyone can find a competition they want to join. And then he went into a nice round table situation. And the round table situation, for me, and again, I was an outsider. I'm a solid tennis player, but I'm by no means an elite tennis player. Yeah. And everybody else on the table was a coach who had been an elite tennis player or an administrator working for Tennis Australia. I was very much an outsider. And having listened to this presentation, what did they do? They all doubled down. Well, we need to do more coaching and better, but better. Mm-hmm. We need to do more competitions, but better. And we need to give more information, but better. And so I did the classic, I'm going to listen to what everybody says, and I'm going to speak last. And I did the ironic thing. I was already into irony by this. I said, well, okay, this seems absurd to me. We've just been told that this isn't working, and your solutions are to do more of what's working, but better and faster and more effectively. That doesn't seem to be the case to me. So when you go into complexity science, you're then looking for other perspectives. And you're looking for naive perspectives, oblique perspectives, and contradictory perspectives. And so on my table, I sort of facilitated another discussion. And one of the oblique perspectives that came up was around coaching, and it was about coaching children. And it was, well, parents aren't actually that interested in having their children learn tennis. What they want is an after-school babysitting service that reduces their guilt.
Yeah.
So if the tennis club can say, well, you send your kids to the tennis club and we'll teach them tennis for an hour and then we'll look after them until you can pick them up, because we have the facilities and we have these enclosed facilities that can do so, then are you interested in sending your child to tennis lessons? So that was the oblique perspective. I mean, who would go from coaching tennis to babysitting? Really fantastic example for me. The second one came from me, which was, again, guilt related, was, if everything's about competition, you're just comp, and then you're entering a competition and you're suddenly, with a modern environment, you're busy, you've got family commitments, you've got work commitments, etc., and you can't make, time and time again, you can't make the competition. So most of your time is spent phoning up people to take your place rather than playing tennis. So you don't want to let your teammates down. You don't want to be all the time on this phone. It's really frustrating and irritating. You get pissed off. So you just give up playing tennis instead, because it's that much not fun.
Yep.
So that was my contrary perspective. And then the naive one, which was, why are all of these coaches running businesses on the courts rather than coaching? Because that's what they were all doing. They were running their own businesses rather than working with the clubs to produce conditions in which people could play more tennis. And so we came up with a completely different set of solutions to everything that every other table came up with through this facilitated method. And I had the chance to implement them at my tennis club because I found them really interesting. And I actually hired the person who said the things about babysitting to run the coaching at the club. And we went from 110 juniors to 480 with 120 on the waiting list in 2 years.
Wow.
We ended up with a 96% court utilisation compared to 27% nationally across Australia. We grew our membership to saturation numbers, which is 4 people per court which is 30 people per court. We had 4 courts. So we went up to 120 with a waiting list from about 80. So a huge increase. And our turnover, because we did other things in the rest of the club, went from, I think, 900,000 a year to 4.4 million. And we were making more money from our tennis courts than an 18-course tennis centre that was competing with us, and we only had 4 courts.
Amazing.
And that was all from listening to different perspectives. And so, okay, one of them came from me, but just coming up with different perspectives. So first of all, listen deeply to what the problem was, listen deeply to what the standard solutions are, and go a step further. And then I had the power to implement them. I mean, I don't think that many of the other clubs did, although we did end up advising other clubs within our network to say, try and do the same thing, and they started seeing the same results. So that, for me, that's where Dave Snowden's work on complex systems and naive and oblique and contradictory questions come in. Really important. And again, he talks about you need experts and non-expert in the same room in order to have these conversations and to listen to the things that need to be said. It's really vital. The second aspect of complexity that I think is really important is the types of scaling that happen. And this is where I go a bit darker, because there are 3 types of scaling. There's sublinear, linear, and superlinear scaling. Now, sublinear scaling is, right, we're going to grow the organisation bigger, but we'll get slower. That's the trade-off.
Yeah.
Okay, so bigger and slower, and we last for a long time. We last forever. And I work with a bunch of Japanese organisations. That defines the Japanese model. They get bigger, they get slower, but they last a long time.
Yeah.
You've then got linear scaling, which is we get bigger and faster. at the same time. Now, that is where I think most organizations are at the moment. We've got, just like these tennis structures, we've got these things that we do. So the equivalent of coaching, the equivalent of competition, the equivalent of information. And we're just going to do more of them, but better and faster. So it's a constant ramping up, more and more and faster and better and better. And you can grow bigger and faster for a while, but then you suffer a heart attack and die.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what you're seeing in organizations as well. You're seeing this reporting of overwhelm, of burnout, of breakdown. You're seeing it at the individual level, but that's predictive of what's going to happen at the organizational level unless you fix things. Now, the final one, which is superlinear scaling, which in mathematical terms means you can grow bigger and faster forever, requires constant adaptability. So you've got to adapt to context all the time.
Yep.
And in order to adapt to context all the time, you can't bring in the big consultancies because their model is to sell best practice. That's not adapting to context. What you have to do is create the conditions in which everybody in your organization is doing the sense making that enables you to adapt to the context that allows you to grow bigger and faster.
Yeah.
And so that to go from a sort of complexity perspective, and that's quite a long answer. I think it's very difficult to describe complexity, so I hope that's done a decent job of it.
Well, it's more than a half decent job, Richard. That's a terrific answer. There's a couple of things. I mean, I think you described in one aspect, and I'm just going to plug my own way for a minute. But I think it's when we look at the industry, why do we do what we do, right? Because when we were looking, go back to where we started this process, where organizations were sense making, listening to their people with a survey once a year. I mean, that was what we were, and then we were looking around, looking at the world, saying that the response for everybody else now is let's go build a solution that does this 4 times a year. Let's go build a solution that does this monthly. So the Pulse survey technology market arrives, which is exactly the same as the annual survey, only just done faster and a bit better, if that makes sense, and distinct from, and I think that Harkin is obviously trying to address a slightly different problem, which is to live in the context. So it's not, always on and always live doesn't mean faster. Of course, it results in faster, but it isn't. That's not the purpose. We're not trying to do faster surveys. We're trying to listen differently. But you also talked about something else I'm really interested in, because the piece about oblique, naive, and the third one, forgive me,
contradictory.
Right. So that's a really interesting thing to look at as well, because we talk about, and I've not thought about it in that way, but one of the big challenges with listening, particularly anonymously, and actually I suspect it's true of all contexts, but when you get to the point where people are prepared to share stuff, their feedback, their experiences in a different way or more openly, then that challenge in leadership listening emerges, right? So people are saying negative things. I don't like listening to this. We tend to frame those comments or that sort of perspective as an unmet need. So when people are complaining about the organization or saying things and it's not always terrifically well framed, what I think we are trying to help organizations to do is to lean into those things and try and find out more, because it's in there. We're trying to find the grit. Whereas what more organizations try to do is, how do we silence those voices? Because they're not helping us. Whereas I think that's probably where the help really is. What's this, everybody coming in and telling you that I'm having a terrific day is great. That's a really good bit of information to have as a leader. My team is doing great, but the nuggets that they're missing out on because they don't know how to engage with it. They don't know how to face into, what's the word I'm looking for? Dissenting voices. And dissenting is a challenging word for many people, but a dissenting voice that says this is not the way I see it. And half the time it's because it's poorly framed. And I'll give you an example of one that worked really well. So there's one of our clients had done a town hall, sort of usual roadshow type activity. They're going out, sharing the plans, talking to the organisation about where they're going. An hour or so later, you see sort of Harkin lighting up with feedback. So people, there's lots of sort of people having good days and experience, sharing this sort of brilliant to hear the strategy, love where we're going, really excited, super motivated right now, all that sort of stuff. And then suddenly a sort of different color comment appears, which is like, but actually, I know everybody else is stoked and excited by what we've just seen, but I'm really unsettled. I didn't get it, and I don't know what it means for me, and now I'm worried. I like that. So that's a very easy one to engage with, right? But you know, half an hour, 40 minutes later, one of the exec appeared on the wall on Harkin, announced themselves. Hi, it's David. They weren't called David, but yeah, hi, it's David. You know, just want to. That wasn't our intention. Thank you for your feedback. And wasn't you shouldn't have left that feeling uncertain or and all that sort of stuff. Come and talk to me, or talk to me here where you can be honest. I think that's a really, really good response. But all too often, if that was not framed in that way, I think this is, you know, you're everybody's excited. I'm bloody not rubbish, right? If you'd said that, much harder to engage with and would have, you know, got a different reaction, if that makes sense. And I think it's in that, it's in there that I think that there's a lot of value to be had for organizations. That makes sense?
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think you're in the same space that I would be within the irony space, although perhaps your people are talking about, whereas the ironist is very clear-sighted as to, I know exactly what the absurdity is. Yours is more intuitive. It's like there's feelings and emotions going on here. This situation doesn't feel right. Hopes and preferences. I mean, it's basic sense making. So yeah. I'm trying to sense make this, and I don't quite understand it. I'm confused. I've got concerns. I've got questions. I've got feelings and emotions. I've got intuition. I've got all of ideas and hopes and dreams and worries. All of this, you're tapping in. You're tagging into basic sense making, which is kind of the capacity to make the clear-sightedness. But you've got people higher up the organisation saying, no, that's not. Sense making is bad. Sense making is just evidence of people being dissatisfied and bad employees and bad apples and troublemakers and people that we shouldn't really have at our organisation. Which is there's two elements of that. There's the classic Theory X leadership model, which is all of, you know, employees are stupid and complacent and lazy. If they weren't, they'd be in my role. So why should I listen to them? Which has, you know, been around since management was invented. I mean, it's a big part of why management was invented. And then you've also got, I think, positive psychology interfering with this. So positive psychology is basically saying, like, the good employee is constantly engaged, is constantly on a growth mindset, is constantly saying the right things and passionate and authentic, and the authenticness is aligned with the organizational drive. That's why they're part of the organization, shared values, all of this kind of stuff. And I think both from either perspective interfered. Neither of them are humanist. The humanist goes, yes, we are partially good, but we have these darker sides to us as well. And we're wrestling with the gap in between all the time. We can be the great employee doing the great things, and we can be but the great employee doing the great things might be raising things when they need to be raised, reporting your confusion, reporting that you're not feeling it, or that you're worried, reporting you don't understand it, or even adding depth to the situational description. All of that. There's a real tendency, because of Theory X, which I think has been around for since the 1900s as a way of thinking about employees, and positive psychology, which is only the right employees have these right behaviours, and if anything outside of those behaviours is a problem. I think they both interfere with what you're trying to do, and again, I mean, in the work that we do, that there's, you need the right leader to sponsor this, because a lot of other leaders think this way, and I don't think they know why they think this way. So if you say to them Theory X and positive psychology, they won't know what you're talking about. But they've internalized it through multiple sources, and that's their attitude to the world, and that's how they attend to the world without necessarily realizing why.
Yeah, brilliant. And look, because I think that, again, a great response. There's a few things we just touched on there. I'd love to just get you get some perspectives. It'd be remiss of me not to grab you on them whilst I'm talking to you. So firstly, the positive psychology thing is interesting. I'll just share a little insight to go back to the beginning of our journey. I remember so bear in mind, it's an anonymous platform. One of the early adopters, leaders, who's still a user and a terrific sort of advocate for what we do. But every day he would use Hearken and check in and score really high and write a sort of positive motivational comment. And I have a lens that means I can see humans behind data. But when I met him, one-to-one at one point, and I said, well, why do you do that? And he said, I don't know, I feel like I'm supposed to be motivating people all of the time. I said, but nobody knows that's you saying it. So it has absolutely, so it's not like that I'm the boss saying positive things every day because that's going to infect everybody else with positivity. And I found that a really sort of amusing and perplexing sort of situation where just his belief about his position in an organization, stripped of identity, stripped of that position as it relates to anybody else, still felt must be positive, right? So I think
that sounds like transformational leadership beliefs to me, where my belief is that I should be this idealized influencer and inspirational and all of this kind of stuff. And so that's what a good leader looks like. Yeah. Which again is going back to the person production, the people production aspect of leadership, not the stable change aspect of leadership. So it's something that did work, maybe, and I'm very doubtful that transformational leadership ever worked in an organisational setting. It's a political model, but that again internalized ways of behaving that are associated with the role that probably aren't delivering what you hope they're delivering. But you think, I've got to keep on doing it, keep on doing it, do more of it. You're in the same space again. So sorry, I interrupted. That was your first example.
No, that's not
more than one.
No, that's not an interruption. That's a good value add. But so, no, I agree entirely. Now, you touched on Theory X. Now, you talk, one of the things I look forward to, because of the time zone difference between you and I, one of the first things that happens most mornings is you will appear in my LinkedIn feed. Something you've shared or a perspective, and I look forward to them because they are always brilliant. And I just, for anybody else listening to this, by the way, do follow Dr. Richard Claydon on LinkedIn because it's a whole bunch of clever stuff. Now, there was an interesting exchange recently: Theory X, Theory Y, growth, fixed mindset, which was one of a theory sort of model I could have picked up today and raised. But I wanted just your thoughts on that, right? Because so you were describing, well, you know what you've written, so I won't repeat it for you unless you want me to help.
No, it's all good. Yeah. So my thoughts on that. So my main thoughts on Theory X, the idea that all employees are lazy, complacent, and stupid, and need to be coerced into doing the work, is very one-dimensional. Clearly, not everyone is like that, but perhaps a few people are. Mm-hmm. And Theory Y, the idea that everyone is self-motivated and driven and looking for interesting work, and they're the only ones you should be employing. Clearly, not everyone is like that. It's a much nicer perspective to take of workers, but again, not everyone is like that. Some people are just there for the money. They don't need to be. They're just making a living, and that should be fine. What I'm really and it's a really useful way to bounce up against a manager's perspective on the world, because that's all it really is if you as a manager have a Theory X perspective or a Theory Y perspective, how do you attend to the world? How do you sense make your own actions? And you're kind of going, a more humanist model is both and, not either or. You've got to push them all together. Growth mindset and fixed mindset is something that really bothers me. So classically, there's something I would call achievement psychology. And so achievement psychology is it's been around since the 1950s, and it's the idea that in order to have a prosperous economy, you have to create a high level of achievement within the vast majority of the population. So you get all of these people who are driven by self-achievement. Okay, so that's achievement psychology, and I would put growth mindset as a subset of that. So growth mindset is, right, you've achieved this much, but push yourself more and push yourself more and push yourself more and push yourself more, etc., 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 until you So competency frameworks in organizations are an achievement psychology thing. It's how do you identify people who keep on pushing themselves and keep on achieving to get the skills across the range, whatever range of competencies the organization thinks are the ones. The challenge, there are a couple of challenges with this. The first one is the research that shows that people with a much higher achievement drive or need for achievement than a need for power are the worst leaders that you can report to, because everything is about them and their achievements. They don't have the capacity to lead through others, because if you're leading through others, it's about their achievements, not your achievements. And so you take credit for absolutely everything. It's like, I win, you lose, tough, even though they're reporting to you. So there's a real... So as an individual contributor level, really useful. You've got a whole bunch of individual contributors driving themselves forward. But at a leadership level, really, really problematic. So that's one of the challenges I have with it. And this has been established for 50 years. So why we're still developing people like that and expect them to be good leaders, again, it's one of the big absurdities, I think, in the leadership development practice. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is, so if you fail, it's not because of the situational environment and the situational conditions. It's not because you're in an absurd situation and actually, it's that situation sets you up to fail. It's because you don't have a growth mindset. So everything designed by absolutely anybody else to create a situation that's pretty much central to anybody failing. And I think a huge number of organizations have elements of this, if not large chunks of this within their organization, gets pushed back down to the team. And it's like, well, you just got to change your mindset. You'll be fine. It's just you sorting out your mindset. And I know, and I know stories of people who have, they've really internalized this and they've pushed themselves and pushed themselves and pushed themselves, and they've ended up in hospital.
Yeah.
And I don't think, again, I'm still thinking best intentions. I don't think any manager who says to someone, change your mindset, is coming at it from bad intentions, because they've internalized the idea that a growth mindset is good for the person as well as good for the organization.
You can achieve anything you want.
And so that's what really bothers me about all of that kind of stuff. I think people making decisions based on this are totally and utterly unaware of the research. And so they're actually causing more harm than good, despite having best intentions.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think when my son, who's now at university, came home from school saying that they were encouraging children to develop growth mindsets. If you develop a growth mindset, you will be better. You will achieve more. You will get better results. And sort of that filled me with horror. The idea that that's the problem. And there is a possibly apocryphal tale, isn't there, where the experiment was done where they basically told the teacher, and they randomly selected 4 kids in the class, and told the teacher that those 4 children had tested as gifted. Right. And through the course of that year, those children's grades improved, which I think is a really interesting take on the sort of same thing. So you sort of shift in it's nothing to do with the children at all. It was all to do with the mindset of the person assessing them and reviewing them. But that principle for me,
the conditions they created, for these super kids.
Yeah, exactly right. So suddenly you
that's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I just on a client. I thought this was brilliant, saying that doing the same thing is that interpretation of growth and fixed mindset. We would like to be more growth mindset. Well, that sounds interesting, right? So, again, if you think about the sort of, we would like to create the conditions in which people can achieve more and extend, and all that sort of, I'm sort of happier with that sort of lens. Anyway, so we wondered if you could do something in Harken where we could basically get people to take a test, and at the end of the test, we'll tell you if you are growth or fixed mindseted. And well, firstly, no, right? We're not doing that. And secondly, that kind of goes against the principle of the whole thing, that you are, this test says you're fixed mindseted, but we'd like to be growth mindset. It kind of says you're the wrong person. It's a peculiar interpretation, but one of the many I think we come across.
At a school level, I know where it's come from. It came from Carol Dweck, and it was established in the schools because of Carol Dweck. But at organisational level, I think it's come from Microsoft.
Oh,
So
do you?
under the current leadership, there's been a real push for growth mindsets to be the driving one of the driving cultural elements. So growth. So the argument was, under the previous regime, everything was we weren't growing, we were old fashioned, we weren't moving, etc. So I think it's been used as a shorthand for adaptability in one respect. So how do we adapt and move into new directions? So at a cultural level, I think it's pretty good as a shorthand for adaptability and how do we change our practices and processes so the organisation flourish.
Yeah.
Learning organisation, but not learning about how it's doing work, learning about how work could be done better. So one of the challenges with learning organisations is everybody learns all of the problems within the organisation and recreates them, rather than learning from an extended network about, well, how might we do new things that we haven't thought of before. So I think at that level, it's really good. But I've also had stories from people who used to work there, and they basically said, well, whenever you got on top of the work and you created some slack, it resulted in you being given more work, so you had no slack, because that was growth mindset. Stretch yourself further, do more. And they said that resulted in absolute burnout after 3 years for the vast majority of people. Which, if you've got Microsoft on your CV, probably isn't a problem, because you go, oh look, I've got Microsoft on my CV. You spend your 3 months recovery, and then you go off and get a much more feasible job at a high pay somewhere else. But if you're in an organisation that's not trendy or career building, and you're putting these conditions in place, you're not getting the people who want to do this who are willing to trade off 3 years of their life, because you're not that kind of organisation. And so creating those conditions and those kind of organisations where there is no escape, because there's no jump to another, and especially if that's becoming the dominant way of doing things, I find that problematic at best and horrifying at worst.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Fascinating. Right, and I'm going to sort of conscious of time, and so when I say two things, there's normally more than two, by the way. Just to warn you, but a couple. So I wanted to talk to you about imperative for leadership, but I think there's something that. This is sort of slightly leading, but it's worth, just before we do that, I wouldn't mind your perspective on what leadership is really about. So just share with me your thoughts on that, because I know you've got some strong views on it, and of course you spend your life in that world.
I mean, I'm becoming more and more, I think I've already said it, I'm becoming more and more aligned with the idea. It's about imposing order when things are getting too chaotic, and injecting complexity when things are getting too ordered, or injecting change when things are getting too ordered, and that capacity to constantly do both at the very high levels, and related to that are skill sets and behaviours and a use of power that allows you to do all of that. So for me, that's the holding of it, the pulling of it all together. And one thing I've missed, which I'm doing more and more of, is the clarity of direction. What's your do you have a clarity of, can you go and tell people, we're going here, this is why we're going here, this is what we need to conserve when we get there, this is what we're going to progress, and this is what we're going to transform, because we're going to conserve the things that work, we're going to progress the things that are good but we're not doing well enough, and we're going to transform all the things that don't work. And so you put that up front and say, right, here's the clarity, do you all understand it? Yes, we do. Right, okay, so you're doing the change and the stability at the same time there. Conserving is the stability. Transforming is rapid, complex change. Progress is somewhere in between. And then you've got a skill set to support that. You've got a number of behaviors to support that. And the thing that's nearly always missing is this understanding of power and power relations in actually to be able to do it effectively. And power. And so what I see most times is leadership being seen as, I've got power over the system. And then the point you made is, and part of that job power over the system is, I have power over motivation. It's my job to do all of that motivational kind of stuff, and I don't think leadership looks like that anymore. So that's really how I would define it now. Is a combination of all of these things.
Yeah, brilliant. And so I guess I just want to respond to something you said in there. One of the big challenges for me remains, and I am conscious this is largely because it's the world I spend every day in. But while I still think organisations spend more time on the destination or the end point, the vision, the purpose, those sorts of things, than they do on understanding current context. I always think there's just the 2 points of any journey you really need to move a population. It is clarity of destination and absolute certainty of where you are right now, and that's the piece I think we're not very good at.
I would actually slightly change that. So I would absolutely agree with certainty of where we are now. So again, we're going back into complexity science. Know where you are before knowing where you're next going to move to. Yeah. Because if you don't know where you are, you don't know what steps to take next. You can't.
Well, that's the point.
I don't think. Yeah, but it's the clarity of destination that I think is the problem. I don't think you need clarity of destination. I think you need clarity of direction. We're going in this direction, but we don't know where we're going to end up. We just know that this is the direction in which we wish to travel. And so then you're constantly reimagining what the destination might look like by what happens to you on your travel. So that's the only quibble I'd have with that. I absolutely agree.
I would support that. Do you know what you've just done as well? You've just reminded me that because I spend so much time on the sort of where the organisation is today, I'm aware of where they're going. We find that actually most organisations aren't that clear. And that sort of whole piece about the vision and the priorities as you look through the organisation just don't make it that far very clearly for people, which is really interesting to us. But of course, that you're absolutely right. That from even the way we see the world, it is about direction, and that's probably what I should have said. So it's a direction of travel, but can only be taken the next steps based upon where you are today, and that's the thing I think is really important. But let's just move on to the last thing I want to just get your sense of then. So and you probably had a good go at this already, but where we are right now, the world is what it is. Most organizations, I think, are finding life harder. Imperatives for leadership. So what would be your sort of 2 or 3 big, if I were, and I guess I'm also hearing from you, by the way, I'm just sort of put a caveat in here, the sort of the capital L leadership, which is the sort of top of the organization piece. And of course, leadership behaviors, or leadership we talk about often in organizations is an action rather than a title, but you know what I mean? It's that sort of, what would be your sort of 2 or 3 takeaways for leadership?
I mean, a lot of the work, I have largely spoken about it, but the work we do is we look for deep patterns, things that work at whatever level of leadership you are. And the first one is skill sets. Do you understand, the conditions that you're operating in, where you are now? Do you understand that? And then can you make decisions in an appropriate manner based on where you are now to help you go roughly in the direction you need to go? And then there are different contexts that respond to different skill sets. And actually, as you get further and further up the organization, more and more of those skill sets relate to complexity, the complexity space, complex change rather than complicated order. And so you're trying to move people developmentally towards understanding that. Now, there are a number of behaviors associated with that. So I would cluster them. You can cluster them in many ways, but I cluster them as momentum-generating behaviors and connection-generating behaviors. So are you generating connection between people and resources and ideas? And are you creating an environment in which your team can move things forward? Are you coming up with new ideas? Are you putting the work in? Are you actually delivering and achieving all of this kind of stuff? So you got that as the second level. The third level, again, is the use of power. So are you just exerting power over people and things, or are you creating power with other people and things? So a really good leader creates power with the team. They share their power with the team, and they say, right, and this is where your work is so important, because that means listening.
Yeah.
Because power with is the leader says, right, it's not just about me and my opinions, it's about what you think and what you see, and let's have a conversation about it and turn it into something. So you've got to use power with. And then finally, it's the power to do something about it. So if you've used power with effectively, and you've created a new way of doing things that can scale, and you've got evidence that it can scale, you then have to go elsewhere in the organization and persuade other people that if you do this elsewhere, it's going to be beneficial and have good impact, rather than cause them more work and cause them problems. So you have to go in and do all of the networking stuff. You have to build trust. You have to persuade senior stakeholders that you have character and capability, and you and your whole team do everything in place to do this work. And that requires really high level communicative skills. You need to be able to talk to people about what you're trying to do, and you need to be able to listen to them about what they need done. And then you have to be able to rejiggle things so that what you do is what they're going to ready to support. If you're not listening to what they need to do their work well, and you keep on trying to impose your own stuff, then it doesn't matter how good your team is. That work is always going to be siloed, and it's not going to have impact across the rest of the organizational network. So they're the three things that I'm looking at: is develop a skill set that's contextually appropriate, or multiple skill sets that are contextually appropriate, and know where you are at all times.
Yeah.
Develop these momentum and connection behaviors, and control your dominating and deferring behaviors, and then learn how to use your power effectively. Because if you use it ineffectively, if you only have one-dimensional understanding or two-dimensional understanding of power, it doesn't matter how good you are in the rest of the work, it doesn't actually cause any impact. So that's how I always approach it. And I say, well, it doesn't matter how far back in time you go, this stuff works. It doesn't matter where you go in terms of geographies, this stuff works. So let's anchor your leadership in this. And the metaphor that I quite like using is you need to anchor it yourself in some level of stability. So we use this is the leadership role. This is a role you play, and it's stable. Everything around you is changing. So imagine yourself as a world-class dancer, spinning and twirling and doing all of these things. The faster you spin and twirl, the more stable your core has to be. So your core is understanding these three components of the role that you can think about and enact on an everyday basis in order to enable you to do the change work much more effectively. So again, a relatively long answer to what seemed to be quite a simple question. And I probably have to work on articulating it better, but that's what we try to develop.
Well, listen, if it helps, I was listening to you there thinking, bloody hell, so there's a lot of information, but really, really well articulated and very well broken down as well. So I think that, and I always enjoy talking to you. I think it's terrific. Listen, so is there anything that we've not talked about that you think we should have talked about today?
No, I think we've covered an awful lot in a reasonably short time. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thank you. No, but brilliant. I mean, as I said, I love your perspectives. I always have from the first time I came across your articles, and I love the way you approach your work. Thank you for spending some time with us. So people, I've touched upon finding you on LinkedIn. Obviously, we will put a link in the show notes for this, and when we put it out, we'll make sure that people can find you there. I think I will just reiterate, do follow Richard. I think his narrative around many of the things going on in his interactions with others, sharing content. So one this morning on leadership, which I thought was really interesting as well. So well worth doing. Where else could people find you or connect with you if they wanted to reach out and explore what?
So the easiest way is through the EQ Lab website that I run with Oscar, and the email there is richard@eqlab.co. So it's not .com, it's .co. So don't put the M on the end because I won't get the email. So they're the two easiest ways, either through the website or email me directly.
Brilliant. And if I will just get, so as part of that, by the way, there's a group that get together. I describe this as where I obviously, you know, I've spoken before, but where I met Jeff Marlowe as well. But this group, drinking dialogue, drinking. Which way around is it? DD.
It used to be called Drinking Dialogues, but Oscar rebranded it as Dialogic Drinks. So I'm no longer sure. Yeah.
So that group, it is a terrific. It's a challenging time for us here in the UK. So Tuesday lunchtime, Friday night, very late. But it is of all the networking and sort of conversational groups I've ever attended, is by far the highest quality. I go there every time feeling like a schoolboy learning, and it's terrific. And for that, brilliant. So I would thoroughly recommend that. And again, we'll put you'll find that on the EQ website, EQ Lab website. We will put that in the comments for this as well. But thank you for your time, Richard. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.